name's Yann Martel. I'm a novelist. I'm here to do a reading at the Iowa City Public Library. It's good to be here. This is weirdly, this is such a literary place. I mean, I keep on saying you're in the middle of nowhere, because as I said, people say Saskatoon's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's preposterous that a place of 70,000 should have the premier creative writing program in North America, you know, the Writer's Workshop. And what the hell is it doing in Iowa City, surrounded by cornfields? You'd expect it to be like in New York or Boston, you know, the arrogance of the big cities. How did it end up here? But yeah, it baffles me how this place that is so remote doesn't have a damn airport. I had to fly into Cedar Rapids and be driven in. Should be this literary hub. It's extraordinary. Depends on the book. With Life of Pi, I get asked most often details about the novel. You know, what the island means. Is it a true story? Stuff like that. Otherwise, more general questions I get asked about writing. You know, why do you write? How do you write? Those kinds of questions. I don't have a particular favorite for a quiet place. I can find quietness nearly anywhere. Sometimes in a very noisy place you can create an inner bubble of silence. And but I work best, if that's what you're referring to, quiet, where I might work best. At home, but I've traveled, I've written while I was traveling, but often just at home. I'm having myself build in my backyard a nice little studio, a writing studio, because I have a baby, a 19-month-old son, and another little girl on the way. And so I needed a separate space from where I live so I can work. And so I'm having this tiny little studio, 8 feet by 10, really quite small because I like cozy spaces. That'll be a favorite quiet spot. But I can work anywhere. In fact, this morning I just spent all morning working in my hotel room here. Well, sometimes the hardest are the most engaging. So a lot of the research for Life of Pi, for example, I did in India, which is a chaotic, cacophonous place. But because of that, very stimulating. You know, after all, words, as noisy as a place gets, words have a sort of a visual reality. You know, the word table emerges in the shapes of the letters in your mind, and whether it's quiet or noisy, it doesn't really matter. So sometimes noise, hurly-burly, doesn't really matter. But once you have that idea, it's there and it feeds on itself and it ignores the outside environment. So as I said, I can pretty well work anywhere. At this moment, no, but I would say in general, all of the above. Books, teachers, authors. You know, my favorite living writer is probably J.M. Coetzee, the South African/Australian writer. He won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. He wrote Disgrace. He's an extraordinary writer. It's incredible what he does with so little. His style is very, very spare, but not like, when we think of spare, we always think of Hemingway, which is a very peculiar spareness, because in fact there's quite a cadence to Hemingway's style. It's very stylized, Hemingway's style. There's a greater naturalness to Coetzee's style, but still extremely spare, and yet it's unbelievably evocative. And he's a deeply serious writer. So he's an extraordinary writer. He's my favorite. And other, you know, hordes of writers have influenced me. I can't say there's any particular, you know, patron saint that I have. Patron literary saint. You know, I like individual books of writers, but I also get inspiration from traveling, from all kinds of sources. That is sometimes not necessary. I think, in fact, I mentioned Hemingway. It's interesting how writing has evolved since the 19th century. If you read 19th century novels, for example, like Conrad, brilliant as they are, they're very wordy, sometimes excessively wordy. Think Henry James. And yet, and since Hemingway, since the 20th century, since the advent of the 20th century, we aspire generally to spareness, to exactness, which sometimes leads to a sort of sterile precision of writing. You know, so technically correct that we lose point, that it's just a means to an end, to communicate something. So nonetheless, I also have fallen into that sort of trap of the times, to try to be as careful as possible And yet I think it's best if sometimes we lose ourselves a bit when we write and we just get it down. Because after all, words are just refined grunts. And it's what is behind the grunts, what you're trying to communicate, the emotion, the idea that really counts. And so long as it's successful in catching the reader's attention, at one point the actual words don't matter quite as much as we think. And you see that, in fact, when you read quote-unquote bad books, popular fiction that is deemed by highbrows to be bad. They're in fact very engaging, and you forget their badness because they are engaging. And the converse is, literary fiction that is bad precisely because all you see the words is and there's nothing behind them. So you have to balance that mixture of abandonment and care. Very long-winded answer. I don't know if that was your question. Something that I want to include in my work, yeah, all of this, life. That's what you do with words. You try to capture reality so that it, on the one hand, makes greater sense to you, and also because this reality is fleeting. Or actually, it's not fleeting. My perception of it is fleeting. And you want to capture that fleetingness in a way that's more permanent, so that you can, on the one hand, examine it, and on the other hand, memorialize it. And I think that's the great challenge of every writing, is to capture what you feel, what you see, in a way that is somehow coherent with that reality. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'd say the literary word, as opposed to, let's say, the technical word, the literary word is inherently spiritual. Because there's a lot of work writing words. If you just wanted to mechanically capture something, forgetting any spirit, you wouldn't write, you'd take pictures. Nothing will capture a reality like a photograph or a cinema or a movie. But in writing words that try to capture experience, that try to remember lost time, it inherently becomes a spiritual activity of trying to understand the inner core of something. So I think it is entirely spiritual. Who is a writer? I think a writer is a witness who, in witnessing, eventually participates. Because the act of witness, in fact, changes the reality that the writer is witnessing. And that is essential for our society. We need that act of witness that makes us think, makes us change, makes us actors. And so, yeah, I think that's it, the act of witness, which becomes, in a sense, action.